It was supposed to be the perfect birthday party, an event full of laughter, joy, and innocence, where the only worries were the cake, the decorations, and the excitement of turning another year older. The sun was shining, and the backyard was full of life. Balloons floated in the breeze, kids were running around, and everything seemed perfect. But as the day drew to a close, a dark mystery began to unfold. A child, just 7 years old, had vanished without a trace. No one saw her leave, no one could hear her footsteps, and no one had any idea where she had gone. The partygoers, initially thinking it was some sort of joke, soon realized it was no game. What happened after that left everyone stunned. But what came next, something as simple as a balloon found deep in the woods, would change everything. And I'm sure, just like me, you're wondering, what could a balloon possibly have to do with this? Well, stick with me because this balloon isn't just a piece of plastic. It's a clue that leads to one of the most shocking and perplexing turns of events. Before we dive deeper, imagine this. You've been to countless birthday parties, right? The energy, the noise, the fun, the chaos. But at the end of every party, the one thing you expect is for all the kids to go home safely, to return to their families, to leave with nothing but memories of an amazing day. Now, picture this. You're the parent, the one responsible for ensuring everything goes smoothly. You look around, and your child is nowhere to be found. 100 thoughts race through your mind. Did they run off to the playground? Are they hiding? Did they get lost in the crowd? But as the minutes stretch into hours, you realize something that you wish you could turn back. Your child is missing. You feel that pit in your stomach, that sinking feeling that no parent should ever have to experience. As we go deeper into this story, we're going to walk through the strange, heartbreaking events that followed. The search for the little girl became a full-scale investigation, with police, volunteers, and the entire community banding together to search every inch of the area. Yet, despite their efforts, the search came up empty. Hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks. Still, no sign of the missing child. The sense of dread and helplessness grew thicker with each passing day. And just when everyone thought hope was all but gone, a single piece of evidence, a balloon, found deep in the woods, reopened the case. You might be asking yourself, why a balloon? What does that have to do with a missing child? It was no ordinary balloon. It was a bright, vivid color, tied with a ribbon, so out of place in the dense, dark woods. The balloon wasn't just a forgotten party favor, it was the key to unlocking a mystery that no one saw coming. And what they uncovered was nothing short of mind-blowing. But let me pause for a moment and make something clear. This is not just a missing child story. It's not just about finding the little girl or solving the case. This story is about uncovering the truth. It's about peeling back the layers of deception and unexpected turns that no one could have predicted. And trust me, as we move through this, you'll find out things that will make your jaw drop. The twists, the unexpected revelations, it's enough to keep you on the edge of your seat. What happened after that balloon was found changed the direction of the entire investigation. As the search intensified, it was clear that the truth was much darker and more complicated than anyone had imagined. The balloon wasn't just a clue, it was a signal, a trail that led investigators down a path they weren't ready for. What was initially thought to be a simple case of a missing child turned into something that no one in this quiet little town could have prepared for. And it all began with one balloon. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. What if the story you're about to hear is much more than just an innocent birthday gone wrong? What if this story reveals something bigger, something that stretches far beyond what we see on the surface? I'm telling you, the truth here is more tangled and unexpected than you could ever guess. Before we continue, let's take a step back and think about the key players in this story. There's the little girl, who is last seen with a big smile on her face, surrounded by family and friends. There's her mother, who, like any other parent, was worried but never expected this nightmare to unfold. Then, there's the town, the tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone. But, as the search began and the truth slowly unraveled, it became clear that not everyone was who they appeared to be. People had secrets, and some of those secrets were tied directly to the disappearance. It was a shocking realization that sent chills down the spine of everyone involved. I'm sure you're wondering what's going to happen next. What does this balloon really mean? Where is the little girl? And how does everything fit together in a way that none of us could have imagined? I'll tell you this, by the end of this story, you'll know the answers. The investigation, the twists, the shocking revelations. You'll get it all. So, stay with me for the ride. We're just getting started, and I promise you by the end of this, you'll look at missing persons cases in a whole new light. But for now, let me leave you with this. What happened next after the discovery of that balloon is something no one was prepared for. And it's something you absolutely won't want to miss. But as we dive deeper into this mystery, one thing remains clear. There's much more to this story than meets the eye. The little girl's name was Emily Carter. Just 7 years old, with big brown eyes and a laugh that could lift the mood of an entire room, Emily was the kind of child who never met a stranger. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her, not just as the birthday girl that weekend, but as the kid who waved at mailmen, gave dandelions to old ladies on their porches, and left drawings in neighbors' mailboxes, just to make them smile. Her birthday party had been long anticipated, especially after a tough year in the Carter household. Emily's mom, Rachel, had recently separated from her husband, Todd, and it had taken a toll on Emily emotionally. She'd been quieter in school, more reserved at playdates, and had even started experiencing night terrors. But for her birthday, Rachel went all out. She invited the whole class, got a bounce house, and even ordered customized unicorn balloons. That Sunday afternoon, the backyard was packed with squeals of laughter and trails of frosting, and for a while, it felt like Emily had her spark back. The party wound down around 4. Guests started to leave, parents came to collect their kids, and Rachel began cleaning up, distracted by a few remaining conversations. Emily had last been seen near the tree line behind the Carter house, clutching one of her signature purple balloons with gold stars, her favorite. That detail would later haunt Rachel. At first, everyone assumed Emily had wandered off to play one last game of hide-and-seek. But when 20 minutes passed and no giggles or footfalls came from the woods, the search began. By nightfall, police had been called. Flashlights swept across trees and underbrush. Voices echoed through the fading daylight, calling her name. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle. No misplaced shoe. Not even a footprint. Just silence. And it was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. What made it all the more confusing was that Emily wasn't the kind of kid to go off on her own. She had separation anxiety, especially since the split between her parents. She clung to her mom like a security blanket and was terrified of the dark. So the idea that she'd willingly walk into the woods alone, especially as dusk settled in, didn't sit right with anyone. And then people started talking. Whispers began circling the town, hinting at something deeper, something unspoken. Had someone taken her? Was it someone from the party? Had she gone to meet someone she shouldn't have? Investigators began piecing together the timeline. Several adults at the party were interviewed, including Todd, Emily's father, who showed up late and stayed only briefly. Todd had been noticeably tense, saying little and watching Emily from a distance. There had been rumors he wasn't handling the divorce well. His business had collapsed months earlier, and he'd reportedly fallen behind on child support. According to some party guests, Todd had a strange look in his eye when he gave Emily her present, a small music box with a ballerina that didn't quite work right. It was out of place, almost like an afterthought. One parent described his expression as detached, maybe even angry. But Todd's alibi for the time of Emily's disappearance checked out. He'd been at a local gas station during the crucial 20-minute window, confirmed by security cameras. Attention then shifted to Rachel's new boyfriend, a man named Marcus Hale. He had been dating Rachel for 4 months and had only recently started staying over at the house. People in town didn't know much about him. He was quiet, polite on the surface, but something about him felt too polished. He didn't drink, didn't joke much, and seemed overly eager to impress. Emily had reportedly warmed up to him over time, but a teacher at her school told police Emily had recently drawn a picture of a scary man standing behind a tree, watching her. The teacher hadn't thought much of it at the time, but after Emily disappeared, It seemed worth mentioning. When questioned, Marcus was cooperative. He denied any involvement and insisted he loved Emily like his own. But investigators couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Still, no physical evidence tied him to the disappearance. And then there was the neighbor, Jeanette Wilkins. She was in her 70s, lived alone, and had a reputation in the neighborhood as being a little off. Jeanette had lived in the same house for over 40 years and spent most of her days on the porch watching kids ride by on their bikes. She wasn't known to be friendly, but she wasn't known to be a threat either. Yet when police canvassed the neighborhood, Jeanette said something odd. She told officers she had seen a girl matching Emily's description walking through the woods with someone, but when pressed for details, she changed her story. First, it was a man in a gray hoodie. Then it was a woman with curly hair. Eventually, she said she might have imagined the whole thing. But the way she said it, the way her voice trembled slightly when she spoke, it didn't feel like a lie. It felt like fear. And that fear raised more questions than answers. As investigators dug deeper, more strange details began to surface. A report came in from a hiker who had been in the woods a day before the party. He claimed to have seen something unusual: balloons. Dozens of them. Not party decorations, but tied in strange patterns to trees, almost like markers or symbols. At the time, he'd taken a photo and thought it was a weird art installation. When he heard about the missing girl, he called it in. But when investigators returned to the site, all the balloons were gone, except for one. The one that changed everything. The one Rachel recognized instantly. It was the purple balloon with the gold stars. Emily's favorite. That balloon wasn't just floating around randomly. It was wedged between tree branches, at least half a mile from the Carter house, high up and partially deflated, but still distinct. Someone had to place it there. Or, at the very least, someone had to have passed that way with Emily. Search dogs were brought back in, and for the first time in days, there was a faint trail, one that veered off in a direction no one had previously searched. But the trail led somewhere strange, an abandoned campground that hadn't been used in over a decade. The place was overgrown, forgotten. No tire tracks. No human presence. Nothing but rot and silence. Still, there were signs someone had been there recently. Fresh footprints. Candy wrappers. A child's shoe, one that matched the pair Emily had been wearing at the party.
Now let that sink in.
Because from this point on, everything starts to blur. What looks like a simple case of a child wandering off suddenly becomes layered, filled with contradictions and questions no one is ready to answer. Why would Emily end up there? Who knew about the abandoned campsite? Why was there no ransom note, no attempt to reach out to the family? And perhaps the most disturbing thought, what if whoever took her wasn't a stranger at all? What if it was someone she knew? Someone who had been to the party, who had smiled and laughed and eaten cake. The community began to grow restless. Everyone had a theory. The Facebook groups exploded with speculation, and TikTok sleuths began analyzing the photos from the birthday party. Some claimed to see a figure in the background. Others insisted they heard a second voice on the birthday video Rachel posted. The case was becoming viral, and not necessarily in a helpful way. Everyone was looking for answers. But the more people searched, the stranger things got. Because with every lead came another dead end. And just when it seemed like the trail was cold again, something else surfaced. Something that pointed to a deeper, darker truth that no one was ready to face. And that's where we pick up next, because what they found hidden inside that forgotten campsite, buried just beneath the surface, would blow the lid off everything the town thought it knew. The morning after investigators discovered Emily's shoe near the abandoned campsite, things took a strange and frustrating turn. The shoe had been tagged, photographed, and secured in an evidence bag just like protocol dictated. It was a breakthrough, something tangible after days of nothing. But when authorities returned to examine the scene further, the shoe was gone. Not just misplaced, completely vanished. The evidence bag itself was missing from the station's storage locker. No one could explain how it had disappeared, and there were no security camera malfunctions, no logged entries after hours. It was like someone had reached into the very system designed to protect truth and plucked it out. That sent a chill through everyone involved. Because it meant one thing: someone didn't want Emily found. And worse, someone had access. The lead detective, a seasoned investigator named Frank Dalton, was furious. He'd been one of the first to believe that this case wasn't random, that it didn't smell right from day one. Dalton wasn't from the area, but he had a reputation for cracking impossible cases. Still, something about this one was getting under his skin. He began quietly asking around, not just about the missing girl, but about the people involved, especially those closest to the Carters. That's when he got a strange call. It was anonymous. A voice modulated through a static-heavy line. All the caller said was, "You're getting too close. Drop it before you end up buried, too." Then they hung up. Dalton wasn't the kind to rattle easily, but he couldn't shake that call. And when he traced it, the signal bounced through 3 towers before dying in the woods just outside of town, near the same area where the balloon had been found. That's when something even more unnerving surfaced. A man named Drew Lancaster came forward with a blurry Polaroid he'd found in an old photo album stored in his attic. Drew had worked as a groundskeeper at the now-defunct campground back in the early 2000s. The photo was dated 2006, and it showed a group of children posing by a tree, clearly taken during a summer trip. But standing at the edge of the photo, almost hidden in shadow, was a man. His face partially obscured, but his eyes clearly visible. Cold. Watching. Drew swore he didn't remember the man, didn't even know the picture existed until recently, but here's the kicker. That same tree in the background was the one where Emily's balloon had been found. The connection was impossible to ignore. As Dalton dove deeper, he uncovered something else, something no one in the community wanted to talk about. A girl had gone missing from the same area nearly 20 years earlier. Her name was Sarah Wexler, and she'd been 9 years old. She disappeared during a church camping trip held at that very site, and the case had been quietly closed as a presumed runaway. But the deeper he looked, the clearer it became. Sarah had never run away. Her disappearance was just as mysterious as Emily's, and the coincidences were piling up. Same location, same age range, same eerie lack of evidence. It was as if the woods themselves were hiding the truth. Rachel Carter, meanwhile, was falling apart. Each day that passed chipped away at her resolve. Her grief had turned to obsession. She started posting in local Facebook groups at odd hours, begging for information, for anyone who might have seen something. That's when someone messaged her directly. Their username was just a string of random letters and numbers, but the message was clear. Your daughter didn't go missing. She was chosen. Stop looking or you'll be next. Attached was a photo of Emily from the birthday party. But it wasn't one Rachel had taken. It had been shot from behind the fence, from the woods. Now, Rachel didn't know whether to call the police or run. The fear was consuming her. Who had taken that picture? How long had they been watching? She showed it to Dalton, who immediately launched a digital forensics request, but the IP address was masked through multiple layers, bouncing through Europe and back. Whoever was behind this was smart, careful, and playing a long game. It was around this time that another detail began bothering Dalton. Marcus, Rachel's boyfriend, had gone strangely quiet. After initially cooperating, he began missing calls, skipping scheduled interviews, and eventually told Rachel he needed space to process everything. But when Dalton looked into Marcus's background, things didn't add up. The job he claimed to have in cybersecurity, the company didn't exist. The references on his resume were untraceable. And more disturbing, a photo turned up in a background check. Marcus at a tech conference in Seattle just 6 months ago, standing next to a man who had once been investigated in the Sarah Wexler disappearance. Was Marcus just a fraud? Or was he something far worse? Dalton kept digging, but each answer only led to more questions. Then came the twist no one expected. A second balloon, this one blue with silver stars, was found by a jogger 2 towns over, tied to a wooden post just outside a burned-down farmhouse. The balloon looked new, untouched by weather, as if it had been placed there just recently. Next to it, barely visible in the dirt, was a locket. Inside was a picture of Rachel and Emily. It was a picture Rachel had never shared. A picture she thought had been lost years ago. Who had access to it? How had it ended up there? And why did it feel like this wasn't just a kidnapping, but a message, a personal message aimed straight at Rachel? The walls were closing in. Evidence was vanishing. Suspects were multiplying. And somewhere in those woods, past and present were colliding in a way that defied coincidence. The more Dalton pushed forward, the more resistance he encountered from higher-ups, from local officials, even from people he thought were allies. It felt like someone didn't just want the case closed, they wanted it buried. But nothing could prepare him, or Rachel, for what was coming next. Because in a shocking twist that no one saw coming, the person who finally broke the silence was someone they'd both trusted from the very beginning. Just 2 days after the discovery of the second balloon and the haunting locket buried near the old farmhouse, another thread of the mystery began to unravel, this time not through Rachel or Dalton, but through someone completely unexpected. Kara Jennings, Rachel's childhood friend and Emily's godmother, had been keeping her distance throughout the investigation. She'd shown up at the party, stayed a few hours, smiled for pictures, and left early. She'd told Rachel she was swamped with work, but in truth, Kara had been dealing with something she hadn't dared share, not with the police, not even with Rachel. A week before Emily vanished, Kara had received a letter. A real, physical letter. No return address. No postage. Just a single page with Emily's school photo taped to the center, and underneath it, in block letters, "You can stop this before it begins." She had thought it was some sick prank, maybe from a deranged internet stalker. She'd almost thrown it away. But after Emily disappeared, the letter began to haunt her. Now, feeling the crushing weight of guilt and fear, Kara brought the letter to Dalton. He stared at it in silence for nearly 10 minutes, his fingers tightening around the edges of the page. The image of Emily was from a private school yearbook, not something publicly available, not something just anyone could get. Someone close had access. Someone who knew when and where to strike. Dalton's mind was racing. If this letter had come before Emily's disappearance, and it referenced stopping something before it begins, then this wasn't a spontaneous abduction. It was calculated.
Planned.
Or worse, ritualistic. But Kara wasn't the only one hiding things. As Dalton began retracing every minute of the party again, he rear-viewed security footage from a neighboring property that overlooked the Carters' backyard. The neighbor, Mr. Hensley, an older man who had a camera set up more out of paranoia than security, had only recently shared all his archived files. Dalton pored over the footage frame by frame. That's when he spotted it, exactly 8 minutes before Rachel noticed Emily missing. A black SUV with no plates parked at the edge of the property, just beyond the tree line. It didn't stay long, only 3 minutes. But from its shadowy window, a hand could be seen holding something, a balloon. Not the red one they'd found. A yellow one. This discovery contradicted what everyone had believed about the timing. It suggested that someone had already been on site and left with something, possibly Emily, before the party even realized she was gone. The SUV was never reported. No guests remembered seeing it. And in the footage, it pulled away slowly, careful not to stir dust or attract attention. Whoever was behind the wheel had been methodical, precise. This wasn't some opportunistic crime. It was a playbook. Dalton took the image of the vehicle to local repair shops and gas stations, hoping someone might recall seeing it. To his surprise, one mechanic on the outskirts of town did remember. Said a man had come in just a few weeks prior, asking for a very specific mod to his SUV's rear windows, ultra-dark privacy tint that was borderline illegal. He paid in cash. No name. But he left behind a receipt by accident, with a scribbled note on the back. 3 letters, KJG. The initials matched Kara Jennings. Dalton confronted Kara again, pressing for answers. She denied knowing anything about the SUV, claimed she had no connection to whoever had been driving it, and swore she'd never written those initials. But as she spoke, Dalton noticed something in her voice, a crack, a hesitation too slight for most to notice. There was something Kara still wasn't saying. And before he could push harder, she received a text on her phone. Her face went pale as she read it. She handed the phone over to Dalton, hands trembling. The message read, "You were warned. Next time it won't be a photo." It'll be her voice. Attached was a short audio file. Dalton hit play. At first, there was silence. Then static. Then something that made every hair on his neck stand up. A child's voice, whispering through distortion. "Help me. I want to come home." The voice sounded like Emily, but distorted just enough to leave room for doubt. Kara was shaking, near hyperventilation. But what disturbed Dalton even more was the background of the audio. A distinct sound, wind chimes. Not just any chimes. He'd heard them before. 2 weeks earlier, during a door-to-door search, Dalton had visited an old woman who lived deep in the woods, alone, on property that had once been part of the old campground grounds. Her porch had a set of unusual chimes, made of broken keys and metal buttons, the kind you don't buy in stores. She'd seemed harmless at the time, just a lonely widow with wild stories and a cluttered yard. But now, that sound was evidence. Proof that Emily, or at least someone trying to mimic her voice, had been near that house. When Dalton returned to that location with backup, they found the place abandoned. The old woman gone. Her belongings scattered. The door left ajar, food still warm on the stove. But something was scrawled across the living room wall in a dark, tar-like substance. 1 becomes 2. 2 becomes silence. No one knew what it meant, but it felt like a countdown. A warning. Or maybe a prophecy. Meanwhile, Rachel's mental state was unraveling. She began seeing symbols drawn in chalk on the sidewalk outside her home, finding dolls posed around her backyard fire pit, their eyes painted over in red. The media was buzzing. Hashtags like #FindEmily, #MissingChildMystery, and #BalloonClueCase were trending. People across the country were offering theories, cult abduction, underground trafficking, even a local cover-up. But no one could agree on what was real, what was rumor, and what was designed to mislead. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a motive. And in the middle of it all, Emily was still missing. Rachel tried to hold herself together, but when she received an envelope with no stamp in her mailbox one night, containing only a broken music box key and a picture of her and Kara from a high school camping trip, she finally broke. The trip had taken place at that same cursed campsite, and she'd long forgotten what happened there, or what secrets might have been buried. Now, not only was the case unraveling in new, darker ways, but it seemed like the very people Rachel thought she could trust, Kara, Marcus, even possibly herself, were all tangled in something much older, much deeper, and far more sinister than anyone had ever expected. But what if the key to finding Emily wasn't just in the present, but in unlocking a memory that someone had tried very hard to erase? And what if Rachel had been carrying that memory all along, without even knowing it? The question wasn't just who took Emily anymore. It was, how many more people were involved? And how far would they go to protect the truth? Rachel Carter hadn't slept in nearly 3 nights. The shadows in her home began to feel like they were breathing, shifting when she wasn't looking, whispering when she was too exhausted to think straight. She kept hearing small thuds in the attic above her bedroom, soft enough to doubt, loud enough to dread. She dismissed them as the house settling, maybe even rodents, but deep down she knew something wasn't right. Emily's room remained untouched, exactly how it was on the day of the party. The unopened gift still sat in the corner, her little shoes lined up perfectly beneath the dresser. Every time Rachel walked past the doorway, it felt like she was passing a grave. And it was only getting worse. It all came crashing down the moment Marcus, her husband, vanished. He hadn't been around much since the 2nd week of the investigation. The strain between them had grown like a wall of glass, clear but unbreakable. Rachel had assumed he was staying late at the firm, diving into work to escape the helplessness that hung in their home like a wet sheet. But when she called his office one evening, just to hear his voice, she was met with confusion. The receptionist informed her that Marcus hadn't been in the office for over a week. He'd taken personal leave the day after Emily disappeared and never returned. That night, his phone went straight to voicemail, and by morning, his car had vanished from the driveway. Rachel filed a missing persons report, and though detectives assured her they'd look into it, Their tone was thin and tired, like they were already overwhelmed. In her heart, she knew this wasn't some breakdown or midlife escape. Marcus wouldn't abandon her like that, not now. Something had happened. Or worse, he'd known something all along and finally paid the price for it. Her panic deepened when she checked the Nest camera footage from their front door. The night Marcus disappeared, around 2:46 a.m., the camera captured a motion alert. The clip showed him stepping out of the house alone, looking tense and hesitant, glancing back several times as if unsure. But just before the video ended, a second figure emerged from the darkness, a tall silhouette in a black hoodie, face hidden beneath the shadow of the porch light. They didn't speak, didn't even touch Marcus. They just stood there, watching him walk to the car, then calmly turned and walked the opposite way, straight into the woods behind their home. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a message. The next day, Rachel received a package. No postage. No return address. Just left on the front step. Inside was Marcus's wedding band, still warm to the touch. And beneath it, a single printed photo of a child's drawing, Emily's style unmistakable. It showed a stick figure girl standing by a tree, with 3 other figures around her. One held a balloon. One had red eyes. And one, disturbingly, looked like it was underground. Rachel was losing her grip on reality. She'd begun to doubt everyone around her. The neighbors who once brought casseroles now only gave her awkward glances and shut their doors faster. Her phone buzzed constantly with spam calls, but sometimes there would be no number at all, just static when she answered. Her inbox filled with anonymous tips, theories, and hate-filled messages blaming her for what had happened. But the most chilling moment came when she opened her freezer and found it packed with red balloons, deflated, water-damaged, and tagged with numbers written in black ink.
Some were torn.
Some had strands of blonde hair frozen inside them. It was no longer just a search for a missing child. It was a psychological siege. As she sat on the floor of her kitchen, her breath shallow and her heart racing, she began to remember something she hadn't let herself think about in years. Back when she and Kara were 15, on that camping trip at the old state park, something had happened. Something Rachel had blocked out until now. She remembered the fire pit, the whispers in the woods, the way Kara had pulled her away from a group of older teens who had been performing some kind of strange game, blindfolding, chanting, and giving each other dares. One of those teens had dared Rachel to follow a trail of balloons deep into the forest. She'd refused. But Kara had followed. And when she came back, she wasn't the same. Now, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened back then hadn't ended. It had just waited, lurked. And now it was unfolding again, through her daughter. The woods behind their home, once the site of childhood forts and picnics, had become a living nightmare. She swore she saw figures standing at the tree line at night. She swore she heard Emily calling her name from somewhere far beyond the light. And sometimes she answered. Desperate for help, Rachel reached out to Dalton, only to discover he, too, had gone silent. His office was dark. His voicemail full. The last time anyone had seen him, he was heading toward the lake near the old farmhouse. A place locals now avoided entirely. Rumors were starting to swirl online. The hashtag #MissingDetective hashtag started trending along with hashtag #DarkForestTheory and hashtag #RachelKnowsMore. Rachel was officially alone. Everyone who tried to help her disappeared, backed off, or went silent. Someone, or something, was tightening the circle around her. And the more she tried to fight it, the more the past bled into the present. It was no longer about Emily. It was about whatever had been buried, long ago, that someone was now willing to kill to keep hidden. And as Rachel stood in Emily's room that night, she noticed something that hadn't been there before, drawn faintly on the window in condensation, as if a tiny finger had traced it from the inside. The number 2. She stared at it, frozen, heart pounding. Then she turned to look at the balloon she'd found earlier in the week, now sealed in a police evidence bag on her dresser. On its surface, in faded ink, was the number 1. Something was counting. Something was coming. And Rachel had no idea how much time she had left before whatever was hiding in the shadows stepped fully into the light. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind of rain that turns the sky the color of gunmetal and makes even familiar places feel alien. Rachel was driving back from the sheriff's office after a fruitless meeting with a new deputy assigned to her case, a young man who clearly didn't believe her and seemed more interested in checking his phone than reviewing the balloon evidence she'd brought. Her frustration was boiling over. Her wipers struggled against the downpour, and she gripped the steering wheel tighter than she realized. As she turned into her neighborhood, something in her rearview mirror caught her attention. A dark blue sedan was following her, one she'd noticed twice before this week, parked across the street from her house and outside the grocery store. She took 3 extra turns just to be sure, and each time, the car matched her move perfectly. She didn't go home. Instead, she turned sharply into an old church parking lot and watched the sedan drive past, slow, deliberate, the windows too tinted to make out the driver. But on the back bumper, obscured partially by dirt and leaves, she spotted something chilling, a faded sticker from the daycare Emily had attended 2 years ago. A daycare that had shut down after a surprise investigation into employee misconduct, one she and Marcus had never talked about since pulling Emily out overnight. Rachel's stomach sank. She hadn't thought about that place in years. The director, Ms. Laurel, had been vague with her answers back then, insisting it was a misunderstanding. But now, with the memories resurfacing, Rachel remembered the way Emily used to wake up screaming after nap time, how she'd draw those same 3 stick figures over and over again, the one with red eyes, the balloon, and the shadow buried underground. Suddenly, the images weren't just symbols. They were connected to something real. She pulled into the church parking lot, heart racing, and opened her glove box, searching for an old folder she remembered Marcus putting there, papers from the daycare, back when he was trying to pursue legal action. Inside the folder was a single photo she'd never seen before. It was grainy, like a security still. It showed Emily standing by a sandbox, staring up at someone out of frame. But it wasn't the expression on her face that made Rachel go cold. It was the fact that standing just behind her daughter, almost hidden behind a post, was Dalton. The same private investigator Rachel had hired to find Emily. The man who told her he'd never met their daughter before. Her hands trembled as she tried to process it. Dalton had disappeared, yes, but what if it hadn't been against his will? What if he'd been part of this from the beginning? Everything he'd told her, every lead he'd sent her chasing. What if it was all a script? A way to keep her from getting too close to something he was desperate to hide? She thought back to their conversations, the way he'd always steer her away from that daycare, told her it had been cleared early on. The way he never wanted her to speak directly to Ms. Laurel. Had Dalton known Emily before she vanished? Had he been watching their family long before she even knew his name? Suddenly, Rachel's entire world spun sideways. Every breadcrumb she thought she'd followed on her own might have been placed there, intentionally. The red balloons, the numbers, the messages. What if it wasn't just a threat or a clue? What if it was a countdown not to something tragic, but something planned? Later that evening, driven by desperation and disbelief, Rachel returned to the daycare building. It had been abandoned since the scandal broke, with boards over the windows and weeds curling up the sidewalk. But when she pried the back door open with a crowbar from her trunk, she didn't find dust and rot. She found light. Weak, flickering fluorescent lights still powered by a generator humming somewhere deep inside. And on the walls of the hallway, childlike drawings covered every surface. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens. All in Emily's distinct style. She moved deeper inside, her breath shaky and cold. In one of the rooms, room 4, she found a whiteboard covered in names, dates, and strange coded symbols. And there, in the middle, circled in red, was a name she hadn't heard in years. Marcus Carter. Her husband's name. Listed not as a parent, but as a program volunteer. Rachel staggered back, staring at it in disbelief. Marcus had never told her he volunteered here. Never said a word about being involved in the daycare's operations. But this wasn't just a mistake. There were staff notes written beneath his name. Phrases like needs clearance renewal and observed on-site with subject 5, Emily. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from deeper in the building. followed by the sound of something scraping along the linoleum. Rachel bolted, heart slamming against her ribs. As she sprinted out the back and slammed the car door shut behind her, she realized the truth. This wasn't just a case of a missing child. This was something deeper, something systemic. And somehow, Marcus, Dalton, and even the daycare that had once seemed so harmless were all connected to it. What if Emily hadn't just been taken? What if she'd been chosen? And now, with the clues unraveling faster than she could hold them together, Rachel wasn't sure who was trying to save her daughter, or who had been lying to her from the very beginning. Rachel didn't sleep that night, not really. Her body was exhausted, her nerves frayed, but her mind kept replaying the image of Marcus's name written under that cold heading, Program Volunteer. It felt like a betrayal deeper than anything she could articulate. For hours, she sat in the dark with only the kitchen light on, flipping through old photographs, school enrollment forms, daycare emails, looking for signs she had missed. Every photo of Marcus holding Emily now seemed different, not loving, but staged. Every line he'd ever fed her about how the daycare just wasn't a good fit now carried a sinister undertone. And as morning light began to filter through the curtains, Rachel finally did what she had avoided doing since this began. She confronted him. Marcus had just returned from the gym, still damp with sweat and unsuspecting. But when Rachel met him at the door, holding the photograph of Dalton with Emily at the daycare and the copied staff board from room 4, the smile fell off his face. He didn't deny it, didn't even pretend to be confused. He simply looked at her like someone who'd been caught holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. Rachel demanded answers, her voice cracking between rage and heartbreak. She begged him to tell her what the hell he had gotten their daughter involved in, why his name was on that list, why Dalton had known Emily before the disappearance. And that's when Marcus, the man she'd built a family with, told her something she could never have imagined. I did it to protect her. He claimed he'd been approached years ago by a nonprofit front, a research initiative, he called it, that offered elite developmental opportunities for children showing certain cognitive markers. They had identified Emily early, he said, before she turned 4. Rachel stared at him in horror as he spoke about it like a scholarship application. He explained that he'd been asked not to tell anyone, not even Rachel, and that the program had promised secrecy for the safety of all involved. But then something changed. They moved a location, shut down the daycare, and Marcus lost contact with the program's lead. That's when Emily began having nightmares. That's when the red balloon drawing started. Rachel asked him why he never came clean. Why, when their daughter went missing, he let her spiral into madness chasing shadows alone. And his answer was worse than the silence. Because I thought they took her back. And if I tried to fight it, I thought we'd both lose her forever. The words felt like lead in her chest. She screamed, sobbed, pleaded with him to tell her where Emily was now. But Marcus said he didn't know. He hadn't heard from the program in over a year. What he did have, though, was a burner phone. One that had only ever received anonymous messages, always encrypted, always vague. He handed it to Rachel, swearing he'd kept it hidden because he believed the program would eventually reach back out with answers. As she scrolled through the messages, one stuck out, received just 2 days after Emily's birthday party. It read, "Subject active. Observe behavior. Do not interfere." Rachel recoiled. Subject? That's our daughter. But Marcus didn't flinch. He just looked tired. You don't know what she is, Rachel. You never saw what they saw. It was in that moment Rachel realized something more terrifying than the disappearance itself. Marcus didn't just suspect Emily had been taken. He believed she belonged to them. And worse, he still did. Later that night, she received a message of her own from the same number that had sent Marcus the program alerts.
It was a short video.
Shaky footage taken in the woods, clearly from a drone. The lens zoomed in on a clearing near the river where search parties had passed by countless times. And standing there, alone, was a girl in a yellow raincoat. Her back was turned, but the way she stood, the slight tilt of her head, the familiar rhythm of her rocking, Rachel knew. It was Emily. Before the footage ended, the camera caught something else. A figure stepped into frame behind her. an adult in a black jacket with a logo Rachel recognized from the old daycare's front door. The person whispered something to the girl, and then they both turned slowly, almost eerily, to look up at the drone, as if they knew it was there. Rachel clutched the phone, her throat dry. Beneath the video was a message. You want her back?
Come alone.
No police. Tomorrow night. Or she disappears again for good. Now Rachel faced a decision no parent should ever have to make. Trust the man who had betrayed her, involve law enforcement, and risk losing Emily forever, or walk into a trap completely alone, not knowing what she was walking into or who might be waiting on the other side. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. She was out of time. The program hadn't just taken her daughter, they had raised her in the shadows. And now, Rachel wasn't sure if she was rescuing Emily or interrupting something much bigger than she could possibly understand. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow night, the truth would either set her free or destroy everything she thought she knew about her family. Rachel didn't sleep the night before she was supposed to go into the woods. Every sound outside her window felt like a threat. Every car passing by, every flicker of shadow beneath the trees, kept her on edge. But as the clock crept past midnight, something inside her shifted. Fear gave way to something sharper, resolve. She had packed the burner phone, a flashlight, and a photo of Emily folded in her back pocket like a talisman. Her hands trembled, but not from doubt anymore, from rage. Whoever had taken her daughter had underestimated what a mother would do when pushed too far. By the time Rachel reached the edge of the woods, the night was heavy with fog, the kind that muted sound and made it feel like the world was holding its breath. The drone footage had pinned the location near an old service road that hadn't been used in years. As she walked deeper into the forest, the trees closed in like walls, the moon barely able to pierce through the canopy above. Her flashlight flickered. The air smelled like wet earth and pine, but underneath that was something metallic, like rust or blood. She saw the light first, dim, flickering, like an old lantern. Then came the voices, hushed and rhythmic, as if people were reciting something together. Rachel crept forward, keeping low, until the trees opened up into a clearing that looked like something out of a nightmare. Tents, equipment, laptops wired to strange machinery, and in the center of it all, standing calmly beside a glowing panel, was Dalton. Not hiding, not afraid, like he'd been expecting her. What Rachel didn't expect was who stood beside him, Detective Harlow. The same woman who had been leading the investigation since day one. The one who'd promised to find Emily. The one Rachel had cried in front of, confided in. Harlow met Rachel's eyes without a trace of guilt. You shouldn't have come alone, she said softly, not as a warning but as a statement of fact. Rachel's heart dropped. Why are you here? What is this? Dalton answered, his tone eerily calm. You think this is about your daughter. But it never was just about her. Emily is one of many, Rachel. She's part of something bigger. A generation with abilities we're only beginning to understand. Your government knows. Your husband knew. We're not the villains here. We're the caretakers. But Rachel didn't hear anything after many. Her mind raced, connecting the dots she had refused to consider before. The other children at the daycare. The ones who disappeared. The matching drawings on the walls. The red balloons that kept surfacing, balloons that now seemed less like a symbol of innocence and more like a calling card. She wasn't chasing down a kidnapping. She'd walked into the middle of a coordinated operation. One involving tech, psychology, maybe even mind control. And worst of all, they thought they were doing the right thing. Suddenly, a scream tore through the night. Emily's voice. It was real. Rachel knew it deep in her soul. She spun around, flashlight sweeping across the trees. But Dalton didn't move. Neither did Harlow. You were warned not to interfere, the detective said coldly. Now you've forced our hand. Rachel ran. The woods became a blur of motion and sound. Twigs snapped under her feet, branches clawed at her arms, but she didn't stop. She didn't care about staying quiet or hidden anymore. All that mattered was that scream. It had come from the northeast, toward the old ranger station. Rachel knew the path, barely visible under the overgrowth, but as she neared it, she saw something that nearly made her fall to her knees. More children, at least 5 of them, all in identical yellow raincoats, standing in a perfect line outside the ranger cabin. Their expressions were blank. Not scared, not curious, just blank. One of them held a red balloon. Another clutched a notebook identical to Emily's. But Emily wasn't there. Rachel called out, but they didn't respond. Instead, they turned and began walking toward her like a slow-moving wave. She backed away, whispering her daughter's name over and over, desperate for a sign. And then, from behind her, came the sound of something much worse: vehicles. Engines. Boots hitting dirt. More people were coming. This wasn't just a program anymore. It was an operation. It was real. And it was much bigger than she ever imagined. Rachel ducked into the underbrush, heart pounding so hard it hurt. She pulled out the burner phone, but there was no signal. Just a single new message waiting on the screen. It was a video, live footage from a surveillance drone. And there, inside the cabin, was Emily. But the camera panned out, and Rachel's stomach dropped. Because standing over her was Marcus. And he was wearing the same black jacket as the others. The betrayal hit like a punch to the chest. This wasn't over. It had never even truly begun. Rachel had always imagined that the end, if it ever came, would be loud. That there'd be sirens, shouting, a moment where good and evil collided in some explosive final confrontation. But when she stepped into the cabin, the air was so quiet it felt like time had stopped. Dust floated through the beam of her flashlight like drifting snow, and everything smelled faintly of mildew, as if the place had been abandoned for years. But it wasn't. Emily was there, curled up in the far corner, her little arms around her knees, eyes wide and distant. She didn't even look up at first, and for a moment, Rachel thought she'd come too late, that they had broken her. But then her daughter blinked and whispered, "Mom?" Rachel's legs nearly gave out. She crossed the room in seconds, tears spilling down her face, reaching for her daughter like the world might vanish if she didn't grab hold of her right then. But before she could even touch her, a voice echoed behind her, calm, familiar, wrong. "Don't do this, Rachel. You're going to undo everything." Marcus stepped forward from the shadows, his silhouette framed in the doorway. He wasn't hiding now. There was no mask, no pretense. He wore that black jacket like a badge, and in his eyes, there wasn't guilt or conflict, just resolve. The kind of certainty that only came from believing you were the hero in a story no one else understood. Rachel stood in front of Emily, shielding her without thinking. "You knew," she said, her voice barely holding together. "You let me think I was crazy. You let me grieve and spiral while you played both sides." Marcus sighed. "You think this is about one child. But this is bigger than Emily. You've seen what she can do. The sketches she draws before things happen. The things she knows without being told. She's part of a larger pattern. And we've been trying to protect her, protect all of them from what's coming." Rachel shook her head, trying to hold onto some thread of sanity. "You kidnapped her. You drugged her. You stood by while they experimented on kids like they were lab rats." "No," he said, stepping closer. "We were teaching them control. Containment. Because there are others who won't be so gentle." She could barely believe what she was hearing. Her husband, Emily's father, wasn't just involved. He was a believer.
He was one of them.
And yet something didn't add up. Why warn her before? Why leave clues? Unless, why the trail, she asked.
The balloon.
The photos. The phone messages. If you wanted to stop me, you could have. But you didn't. You wanted me to find this. Marcus froze. For a brief second, his confidence faltered. "Because I had to show you. You wouldn't have believed me otherwise." "No," Rachel said, her voice rising. "You needed me to lead them here." She turned toward the window, where movement stirred in the trees. Figures. Armed. Watching. "Who's coming, Marcus?" she asked, her breath catching. "Who did you sell us out to?" Before he could answer, the walls shook from a thunderous crack outside. A pulse, low and electric, rippled through the air. Emily screamed. Lights flickered. And then came the sound of a machine powering up, one Rachel had heard only once before, from the lab in the woods, the one she barely escaped. But this was different. Stronger. Final. They activated the array, Marcus said, panic creeping into his voice for the first time. That's not supposed to happen yet. Rachel reached for Emily, pulling her to her feet. Then help me stop it. But Marcus didn't move. The door burst open, and Harlow stormed in, gun drawn, not pointed at Rachel, but at Marcus. Get away from them. Rachel stared, stunned. I'm not with him, Harlow said. I never was. But if we don't shut this down now, no one's walking out of these woods alive. Everything happened at once. Rachel ran with Emily as Harlow held Marcus at gunpoint. The ground quaked beneath them as whatever machine had been buried under the clearing roared to life. In the distance, helicopters were moving in, searchlights piercing through the trees. She didn't know who was friend or foe anymore, but it didn't matter. She had her daughter, and she was getting them out. But just as they reached the edge of the clearing, Emily stopped. She turned back to the cabin, her small face calm. It's okay, Mommy. I can stop it. Rachel looked down at her, heart pounding. What do you mean? Emily held up her notebook, the same one she'd had since the day of the party. Only now the drawings had changed. There were no more balloons or trees. Instead, page after page was filled with strange symbols, patterns, ones that glowed faintly in the darkness. They were wrong, Emily said softly. It's not just me. It's all of us. But I'm the only one who can end it. And then, before Rachel could stop her, Emily stepped forward, into the beam of light streaming from the machine. Rachel screamed, but the light didn't consume her. It pulsed once, then flickered, and died. Silence. The cabin lights blinked out. The humming stopped. The forest held its breath. Rachel dropped to her knees, waiting for the worst. Then Emily turned around, perfectly fine. It's over. But just as Rachel exhaled, just as she felt the weight of it all begin to lift, Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out a red balloon. And whispered, but they're still watching. Then the trees lit up with dozens more red balloons, rising silently into the air. And everything went dark. 3 months later, the cabin in the woods stood empty. The government had sealed it off within days, fencing the entire area and posting vague warning signs about unstable ground. Locals speculated about sinkholes or old military installations, but no one really knew, and those who asked too many questions were met with politely firm silence. Rachel had returned to her hometown with Emily, trading the silence of the trees for the distant hum of suburban streets. Her days were quieter now, marked by therapy appointments and whispered conversations in hushed coffee shops. Emily had gone back to school, though she rarely spoke of what happened. She still drew in her notebook, but the pages were different now, less eerie, more hopeful. Yet every now and then, she'd pause mid-sketch, glance at the window, and press her lips into a thoughtful line, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Rachel still couldn't piece together everything, but she'd learned not all truths arrive neatly packaged. The files she'd stolen from Marcus's encrypted drive had been handed over to an anonymous journalist with a reputation for exposing dark secrets. What followed was a viral explosion of conspiracy videos, Reddit threads, and trending YouTube content under titles like Top 10 Government Secrets They Don't Want You to Know, Proof That Psychic Children Are Real, and What Really Happened at Raven Creek? None of them got the full story right. Most didn't even come close. But in the flood of misinformation, the real truth stayed hidden, quietly camouflaged among the noise. Maybe that was for the best. Harlow had disappeared after the night at the cabin. One moment she was there, helping Rachel and Emily escape through a break in the fence, and the next she was gone, leaving only a burner phone and a note that read, "If you ever need me, I'll know." Rachel wasn't sure if that was a threat or a promise, but some nights, when the wind rustled through the trees outside her bedroom window, she imagined she could hear Harlow's voice in the distance, a warning, a whisper, or perhaps just a memory that refused to settle. Marcus's fate remained a mystery. According to official reports, no body was recovered. Some believed he died when the machine collapsed, crushed beneath concrete and metal. Others claimed he escaped in one of the helicopters that night. Rachel tried not to think about it. Tried not to picture the man who once held her hand under starlit skies now orchestrating a new chapter of some secret project in the shadows. But sometimes, when she passed strangers on the street and caught a glimpse of a familiar gait or tilt of the head, her heart would catch in her throat. Still, Rachel found something close to peace, not closure, maybe not even healing, but a quiet steadiness that helped her move forward. She planted flowers in the backyard, started writing again, and made pancakes with Emily every Saturday. The nightmares came less often. The fear no longer lived in her chest like a ticking clock. But on the morning of Emily's 9th birthday, Rachel found something that sent her pulse racing again. Tucked inside the mailbox, without postage or any markings, was a single envelope. Inside was a drawing, one of Emily's, but this one she had never seen before. It showed their house under a blood-red sky, Emily standing on the porch holding a balloon. Behind her was a figure, tall, cloaked in shadow, watching. On the back of the page, in a child's careful handwriting, were 4 words, "It isn't over yet." Rachel stood there in the driveway, her fingers trembling as the wind picked up. In the distance, far beyond the safety of fences and yards, the trees swayed like they remembered something terrible. Something unfinished. She looked down the street, nothing. No cars. No delivery trucks. No neighbors. Just the sound of a balloon string rustling in the wind. And somewhere, not far enough away, a red balloon floated slowly into the sky. Because some stories never truly end. They just wait.